Good evening. Gonna wait for some people to join us before we get started. Good evening. Glad to see you guys joining us this evening on a Wednesday. In Atlanta here, we've got our first really cool day of fall, so we're excited. Somebody came in first. Somebody says sliding in first. Commit. All right. Glad to see so many of you all have joined us so soon. We're going to continue on with that great discussion we were having about African kings. It's a lot of African kings. We're probably not going to get through all of them. We're still
No.
we're still in the Middle Kingdom of Egypt. I know some people were impatient to get beyond that, but
No. You can't get beyond it. Okay, let me just interrupt to say, if you would deal with great African kings and great African kings only, you'd spend a year here. In other words,
Wow.
we would be meeting, we would be having these sessions every week for a solid year, and you might get through the kings and queens. So we're not even. We are going to really. Yeah, we're going to hopscotch really way over all the kings that we could be talking about. But anyway, let me let Rabia finish the introduction.
No, you don't. I don't even think I said my name yet. Most of you guys probably know by now, but my name is Rabia, and I'm with Dr. Charles S. Finch.
With my middle daughter.
Yeah, well, he won't do this on his own, so that's why I'm here, so that you guys get to benefit from his expertise, and also to spread, just to spread awareness about the work he's done in the past, and the work he has coming out. So, thank you guys for your support always. So we'll just keep. We'll pick up probably we're at the 12th dynasty.
Yeah, we're probably not. We're going to leapfrog over.
Okay.
There's too much. Like I said, there's too much to try to get each and every the kings or rulers. You know, there was 30 dynasties in ancient Egypt and 330 kings or rulers. Okay, you know, you can't even touch a fraction of them. So you kind of, the ones that stand out in history, at least in the retrospective historical consciousness, are the ones I think we're going to talk about. And we are going to eventually get to West Africa now. Will we get to it today? I don't know.
Later in time.
Yeah, because we only do this for about 35 minutes, and there's a limit to how many individual rulers that you can get to. As I say, just in Kemet alone, there were 330 African kings. All right. Now, the one we're going to jump to is, if he's not the most renowned, he's one of the very most renowned of all the ancient kings of Kemet, is Thutmose III. He was the son of Thutmose II and the nephew of Hatshepsut. Now, we're going to talk about Hatshepsut when we come to the queens. And he and Hatshepsut were on a collision course right from the beginning, because these were two of the most powerful personalities in Egyptian history. And she ruled as a pharaoh, not as a queen. She, like I said, she was half-sister to Thutmose II, and stepmother and aunt to Thutmose III. But she ruled for 20 years and had Thutmose III chomping at the bit, so to speak. He just felt like he was the one who was supposed to be in the rulership. But after 20 years, he managed to, quote, get rid of her, out of quotes. Not clear what happened to her. It doesn't seem like she was executed because, her person was sacred. So you couldn't do that. But she was probably exiled to an oasis somewhere. And that's about as much as you can speculate on. But Thutmose III was the most dynamic and powerful of all general in all of ancient Egyptian history. He was Egypt's real bona fide empire builder. Okay, I think he fought for. There were 17 years of wars. He never lost a battle, ever. He went in his conquest and empire building took him into what is now Palestine, east into Babylonia, south into Nubia and Ethiopia, and he just went everywhere and created Egypt's first empire. He was the ancient Egypt's empire builder, and certainly one of the most dynamic and powerful and prominent of all the ancient Egyptian pharaohs, without a doubt. Okay, so again, his name was Thutmose III.
I want to show this interpretation of him.
Yeah, go ahead.
You have an amazing poster here. It was created by, you said Budweiser.
Of all companies, Budweiser. Back in 2000, 19 years ago.
It was their depiction of Thutmose III.
We hope you can see that. I don't know if you can still get this. Is a composite of 30 African kings and queens.
It's 19 years old.
You might want to, if you have a lot. What do you want to say? If you got a lot of initiative, write to Budweiser or send them a text and see if they still produce this.
It's called Great Kings and Queens of Africa.
Yeah, Great Queens and Kings of Africa. You say, well, why Budweiser? I don't know. We don't know.
Celebrating 25 years. It was created in the year 2000.
2000, 19 years ago.
I don't know, maybe I got it.
And so, it is a synopsis of the subject that we're talking about. All right. Now, so Thutmose III was, and some people think of him as the most outstanding of a pharaoh in a kingdom known for outstanding pharaohs with tremendous ability. He wasn't just a conqueror, He apparently had interest in the fine arts, and he promoted the fine arts. He promoted literature. He did everything to raise Egypt up, not only in terms of its power, its geopolitical power, let's call it that, but he also went out of his way to cultivate the arts in Egypt.
And did you say he never lost a battle?
Never lost a battle. Never. 17 years of fighting, just unceasing fighting. He never lost a battle.
He conquered the world and never lost
conquered a good bit of the world, certainly. Like I said, the only thing that set his teeth on edge was his aunt, Hatshepsut, who was just about as formidable as him. But she had, I won't say the bad luck, that's not what I mean, but she was female, and so she had, and we'll talk about her, and she had to overcome tremendous prejudices against a female ruler. But she did, at least for 20 years. And we go back to the fact that in the early history of Egypt, there was no such prejudice. But, again, we're kind of getting a little bit off track a little bit. But it's worth knowing about Thutmose III. Look him up online, all right? Like I said, he's one of the greatest kings that ever lived in any time and any place. Now, after him, we come to the unusual figure of Akhenaten. Akhenaten, he was a grandson or great-grandson of Thutmose III, and yet was an entirely different personality. First of all, he did not like to make war. He was not a general. He was not interested in empire building. And he is the world's first known monotheist. Akhenaten, yeah, sure.
See that picture? It's torn. Which it's so old, so it's so hard. It's this one here.
Yeah.
But this was their depiction of him, and it's not.
It
doesn't seem too far off.
No, it's pretty close. Yeah, because he was the first one. He was unusual in a lot of different ways. One of the ways in which he was unusual, he was the first pharaoh, and almost the only pharaoh in all of Egyptian history, that allowed himself and his family to be depicted in painting and sculpture the way they actually looked. There was a kind of canon, if I can use that word, of how you were supposed to portray a pharaoh or any royal person in art, all right, or a sculpture or the carvings. and there was kind of an ideal, you might say. But Akhenaten, he had a philosophy called let me see, living in truth. Ankh-Emmat. Yeah, the Ankh-Emmat. It means living in truth, and that he took that literally. He wanted himself and his family, really all of Egypt, to be portrayed and act as they really were. All right. So he was, and of course, he's also equally known for his wife, Nefertiti. Everyone, she's one of the most famous queens of antiquity, and they were kind of partners. But where did he learn? Oh, what was the name of this deity that he worshipped exclusively? Aton. Now he had the Aton had a representation, the sun S-U-N, and his rays ended in hands. So that was the idea of his beneficence. And Akhenaten learned or accepted or carried on the worship of Aton from what? From whom? His mother. His mother is the one who, shall we say, what do you want to say? Taught him or brought him into the worship of Aton, A-T-O-N. Now, this is what was different about Akhenaten. He was uncompromising about his exclusive worship of Aton. He became so that he despised, if you can imagine this, the worship of Amun. Mostly because he despised the power that Amun's priests had throughout the country. They were almost like the de facto hidden ruler of ancient Egypt, and he couldn't tolerate that, especially since they were unalterably opposed to the worship of Aton, A-T-O-N, because it was exclusive. There were no other, there were no other gods before me. That was Akhenaten. By the way, and just make a mention, let me see, Akhenaten, Moses would have been born about 100 years or more after Akhenaten. And there are those who think that Moses was a clandestine, what do you want to say, disciple of Akhenaten. Why? Moses was not a Hebrew. You hear what I said? He was not a Hebrew. He was a trained Egyptian initiate and priest. Okay? Osarseph was his original name. What does Osarseph mean? Son of Osiris. He didn't take the name Moses until after he led a band of downtrodden, well, they would consider themselves downtrodden people out of the delta and into the desert, into Palestine. That's when he changed his name to Musa, which means I drew him from the water. That's the way it says in the Bible, and yeah, that's exactly what it means. But that meant that he was taking the name of Horus, because Horus or Heru was said to have been drawn from the waters. All right. Now, whether that's the amniotic waters, however you want to say, all right. But Akhenaten preceded Moses by more than 100 years, and he was uncompromising in his exclusive worship of Aton.
There's a question.
Yes.
Did he give up the military gains of Tutmosis III?
He not that he gave them up. It's just that he didn't try to consolidate them or expand on them. And so, yeah, what happened was this was perceived as weakness by the enemies of ancient Egypt, and they started chipping away at the empire.
And that you call them the Hittites or the Mitanni?
Yeah, the Mitanni. And for that reason, among the Egyptians themselves, Akhenaten was despised. Later on, historically, they despised him because they're the ones that said that he is the one that compromised the empire.
He kind of did.
But now one of the things like I said, what he did with Amun, he did two things. He dispossessed their priests insofar as he was able. You couldn't dispossess them but so much, because they were too well entrenched and too powerful. But he would go and deface the figurines of Amun and put Aton in there instead. Oh, they say he was a fanatic, He was a fanatic about Aton, the single exclusive deity, the first true monotheist in all of history. He too was a patron of the arts, who Okay, what's
It's
happening?
okay.
Okay,
It was
he
slow connection.
he too was the one who what kind of what was I getting ready to say? He wanted he was more interested in cultivating the culture of ancient Egypt. All right, and also winning people over by persuasion. And he never once took his army out into the field, ever. And so the enemies of Egypt started chipping away at that empire. And as I say, in after times, Akhenaten was, you know what people called him? After he died? The criminal. They called him literally the criminal. He was hated
So
by posterity, by Egyptian posterity.
So after he died, they
Oh yeah, they just
wiped.
Oh yeah, they removed all. They chiseled his name out of everything. They removed the worship of Aton, because for a while it was carried on by none other than Tutankhamun. He was first Tutankhaton, but he, seeing the proverbial, what is the word, handwriting on the wall, he gave into the pressure of the priest of Amun, and became a follower, someone who followed and perpetuated the worship and power of Amun. And so he changed his name to Tutankhamun. So, and as you say, as I said earlier, Akhenaten was the first and only pharaoh that ever allowed his facial features and everything else to be reproduced the way they actually look. So he had this long underslung jaw, typical African jaw, and a hyperdolichocephaly. That means a long-headedness, which is typically Eastern African as well. He also was kind of he wasn't you might say the best looking man. He had what they call these bulbous thighs, big huge thighs and spindly legs. Okay, but he let himself to be represented like that. We know exactly what he looked like, and he never varied from that. And he had, I think, 6 daughters. Yeah, he didn't have any sons, and his biggest supporter was his wife Nefertiti. All right, which I think means double beauty. T usually means double. Nefer is beauty, and she was, she was a renowned beauty. All right? And she was, after his mother or with his mother, his most ardent supporter. We're still talking about Akhenaten, but his impact on history, therefore, is a pre-Mosaic emphasis on the worship of a single deity, monotheism in its truest form. Okay, so monotheism, as we understand the term, does not come out of Palestine or Israel. It comes out of, as so many other things do and did, Kemet, through that one individual, one pharaonic individual, Akhenaten. Okay. 17 years, and when he was, some people think that he was poisoned. I mean, the priests of Amun and others were so dead set against him and what he was doing, the harm they thought he was creating for Egypt, that they think that they just did away with him quietly. All right, but anyway, but he was an extraordinary individual,
So yeah, somebody asked if he could be called the father of monotheism.
Yeah, there are people who do exactly that. There's a book by J.A. Rogers called World's Great Men of Color, and that's his title for Akhenaten, the father of monotheism. Yes.
So I said, would you say that Akhenaten's actions were some of the mistakes our ancestors made in our past?
I don't quite understand the question.
Well, do you criticize? Would you criticize his actions?
I think that's hard to give a straight answer to. I understand why he was resisted, and even in after times came to be hated. Yes, he was indeed before his time, and yes, there are those who think that the damage he did to Egypt's international position, power, and prestige, Egypt was never quite able to recover all of that. All of his empire, etc., etc. So I think it's from the point of view of looking backwards in time, it's kind of hard to decide. what you think about Akhenaten. I always find him, as I say, an absolutely fascinating character, and he changed history in a way. He didn't change history at the time he was living. He changed history because of his impact, his influence on the man who 100 years later was a priest of Osiris named Osarsiv, who became Moses, all right, and who was a disciple of Akhenaten. Well, it was kind of totally untenable for him to stay in Egypt with that attitude, and so what did he do? He took up the part of a people in the Western Delta, who were the
Western?
Eastern Delta, excuse me, Eastern Delta. Those people were just looked down upon, despised. All right, they were low class. They were the bricklayers, the brick makers. Now, were they slaves? No, not in a way we mean slaves. But yeah, they were pretty well kept. They were pretty well oppressed and suppressed. And when right after, not in the time of Ramesses, but right after Ramesses, time of Mereneptah, the son of Ramesses, Musa, took up their part and led them out of Kemet. And the people of Kemet were happy to see them go. All the people who followed Moses out of the Eastern Delta and into what we call Palestine 40 years, they weren't all Jews or Hebrews. The Hebrews, part of it was actually a minority. They were like the children of Israel or Jacob. And they were a part of this mixed multitude. Remember, even the Old Testament talks about a mixed multitude. And they weren't even the largest part, all right? But Moses imposed, you might say, his vision of the future of these people on these people. And there are those who say the reason why they wandered in the desert for 40 years is because they wanted those who had grown up in Egypt and had been infected by being in Egypt and were still, shall we say, had some kind of affinity to Egypt, they wanted them to die off so they could create a new dispensation, which became the religion of the Hebrews and eventually Judaism. And of course, we know what happened in the Old Testament with them going into Palestine and, conquering.
So they just lived in Sinai for 40 years.
Well, they were wandering. They were wandering. They had started out as wandering
like
shepherds.
nomadic. Okay.
They were wandering shepherds. Now remember, and before we go on, these people who were the children of Israel spent 430 years in Egypt, or Kemet. 430 years. They had to have been maximally impacted by that experience. They would have been. They would have spoken Egyptian. They would have been influenced by Egyptian culture, religion, everything. So, if you start looking carefully at the Old Testament, you can see it. You can see this, this influence that they could not discard. There was a man, a friend. Well, let me not call him so much a friend. Just a man I admired tremendously. And many of you have heard of him, read of him, know of him, Cheikh Anta Diop, okay? The Senegalese polymath. He was a physicist, historian, anthropologist, etc. And there was one time I met him in a restaurant in London. He'd been invited over to London to speak by Saba Sakana, who I do know, is a friend of mine. And I went over there just to see him. And we just got to talking. He just took out a napkin and broke down the name Abraham. And he said, if you break it up into syllables, it's Ibrahim, all right? The heart or soul of Ra. I said, whoa. And you know what I did? After that, I went home and started doing that with the names of all the Old Testament prophets. And I found exactly the same thing. If you break it down, break their names down to their ancient Egyptian antecedents, you begin to see just how powerfully they were informed by their experience in ancient Egypt. All of them were. And that's in my book, Echoes of the Old Dark Land, Themes from the African Eden. We talk about that, chapter 5, I think.
So, last question on that same theme on monotheism. I guess there's still confusion. Monotheism is not a Kemetic concept.
Oh, no, I wasn't trying to say that. I said that's exactly what it was. Through Akhenaten, though.
Only it was his concept.
Yeah, it was
wasn't
exclusive monotheism. Now, this is one thing you find about African religion, then and now. There's always this idea, this thought, there's another word I'm looking for, where everything comes from the one. In ancient Egypt, they call it the Wa, or the one. Everything comes from the one. They have that sense. But what set Akhenaten apart is he says there was nothing else. There was nothing, no other worship. Only the one, who he called Aton, could be worshipped, and then there would be no strange gods before me. All right? But so the exclusive monotheism that we kind of understand now through Judeo-Christianity and Islam came from Kemet, yes, through Akhenaten.
Yeah, that's so funny. All right, do you want to move to a next?
Well, I was going to say... okay, I was going to kind of... I guess I was going to really... Oh, well, there's a little matter of Kush. Yeah, we ought to say something about Kush before we leapfrog into West Africa. We're not going to be able to do... I don't think we're going to do too much in West Africa, Sunni Ali and Askia Muhammad, etc. tonight. No. But we should...
Let's just do it next time.
Yeah. We should say something about the 25th dynasty and Pianki and Taharqa. Now, you got to understand, Egypt and Nubia, Kemet and Kush, were to each other the way England and, say, Scotland are. They were enmeshed in each other for not even centuries, millennia. Most of the, what do you want to call it? Most of, every pharaoh would marry a Nubian. Sometimes as his chief queen, or just someone who would be, he'd marry everyone. All of them did. All of them had Nubian wives, or Ethiopian wives, Cushitic wives. So there was this, there's this intertwining between Kemet and Kush that was uneradicable. All right. So, but by the 7th century BC, Egypt was far on the decline, okay, and was being threatened by the Assyrians, among others. Right? Well, it was falling apart basically, and its weakness and its collapse was having reverberations southward into Kush. All right, and Napata was the name of the capital city of Kush. Well, Pianki by that time, was his name, Piank, said, in effect, said, oh, no, this cannot be allowed to continue. He took an army out of the south. See, whenever Egypt got in trouble, when it was always some forces from the south that came in and kind of rescued Egypt. Well, it's the same thing what Pianki did. He came into Egypt, swept through the country all the way up to Memphis. He had to conquer cities and outposts and fortresses because Egypt had been, had disintegrated into these warring principalities, and reunited the country. Okay? Interestingly enough, he left his sister in charge, and he went back to Kush. He didn't stay. He did not stay to rule. He left his sister in charge. All right? Now,
Upper Egypt.
Yeah. But Upper Egypt, she ruled from Upper Egypt, but she ruled the whole country. Upper Egypt, as I think you might be realized, Upper Egypt is south, Lower Egypt is north. Now, the next important personage in this phase of Egyptian history. Now, this is again 7th century BC. Yeah, the 600 BC in that century is Taharqa. Taharqa was he wasn't the son. I think he was the grandson or nephew of Pianki. All right. And he ruled for 25 years. He too was a Cushitic pharaoh. But by this time,
I should show their depiction of him. It's just a depiction. Just, you know, thought that was interesting. That would be Taharka. And this is Budweiser put this poster together. It has a lot of other kings on here from West Africa.
Yeah.
So I'll show it again next time.
And Taharka was faced with the same problem that there was some, what do you want to say, disintegrating elements in ancient Kemet, but on top of that, the Assyrians were threatening. And what happened was he entered into what amounted to a 25-year war with the Assyrians. In the end, however, he couldn't prevail. And so he had to retreat back to Kush. And the Assyrians took over Egypt and ruled it. All right? That took, but Taharka didn't just hand it over to them. He fought them for 25 years. But by that time, the Assyrians were an irresistible military power. And they'd had their eye on Egypt for quite some time. Now, what I'm not remembering, see, this is what happens. What happened was the Assyrians didn't last too long. Oh, okay, I know. They weren't that, they got kind of corrupt. And there was a native Egyptian, not king, well, he wasn't a king yet, who rose up, drove them out, and took over. And he made the capital of this new Egypt, Sais, which was on the Mediterranean coast. Now, I'm blocking on that man's name. I shouldn't, because...
Samtek?
Who?
Samtek?
Spell it.
P-S-A-M.
Yeah, Psammetichus. That's right. It is. That's right. The Greeks call him Psammetichus. That's right. That's who it was.
I don't know how to pronounce these things.
But the Assyrians, so they didn't rule very long before Psammetichus rose up against them and drove them out. Okay, and established Egypt in Egyptian hands, ruling from Sais, all right, which is on the Mediterranean coast. If you might say the Ethiopian or Cushitic episode of rule in ancient Egypt. Now, I don't want to go to...
yeah, you can go to another... Well, it's a question.
Okay.
This is a funny question. I can actually answer it. May I ask why he didn't take a Hotep name?
Who?
You.
Oh.
Well, I can say you named most of your sons after Egyptian, Kemet, Pianki.
Yeah, all of my sons have Egyptian names.
But why didn't you take, I guess, adopt later?
Because I was given a name.
By another...
in Senegal.
Okay.
By the Serer people of Senegal. That name is Wagan Fai.
Yeah.
Now, who is Wagan Fai? Now, I've been working with the Serer people in a traditional healing survey over a period of about 2 or 3 years in the early 90s, and I got very, shall we say, very friendly with them. And when I saw them, they would always do things underneath a tree. It's hot in Senegal, hot, desert-like, and everything was done underneath a big spreading tree. And I saw them talking, and they were kind of looking at me, and I didn't know what to make of it. And then they finally said, I don't know, they kind of called me over and says, "You're Wagan Fai." I said, okay. I'm welcome. But who is Wagan Fai? He was the first king of the Serer, the very first, from the 14th century. Nice. So I don't tell a lot of people that name. A lot of people, there are people who know it, but I don't. It's to me, it's kind of a sacred name.
Aww.
And that's the reason. And that's it's a king, it's a royal name. So that I kind of just, although the Beni Noir, the Dahomians also gave me a name called Wesu, which is a Dahomian royal name. But the one that I go by when people want to know my African name is Wagan Fai.
Okay, so he has a little bit more to that question. I actually can't even see the whole thing. But afterwards, you can probably address the rest of his question in the comments. So we're going to close for this evening. And next time we come together, we'll be talking about more of the Ghanaian and Kings of Mali.
But before we do that, yes, we will. But we haven't forgotten the queens.
Well, that's another.
Yeah, but well, I said this is going to continue,
That's
and
another time.
we will come to the queens before too long.
All right. So in 2 weeks, we'll be back here. Usually it's either Tuesday or Wednesday, 7 o'clock always. Thank you.
Thanks for coming, and thanks for tuning in.